Hello, everyone. This is Jason White, and welcome to our 12th ISO podcast. And I was talking to my friend Alberto a little bit ago, and we realized that if we were to make a list of the most spectacular moments in racing history, such a list would be incomplete without the 1985 Indianapolis 500, specifically lap number 120. Because on that lap, our distinguished guest passed Mario Andretti in a daring move for the lead, lost control of his car, avoided contact with Andretti in the wall, and then went on to win the greatest spectacle in racing. But there's so much more to our guest's career than just this one highlight offers us. A lot of intrigue, a lot of adversity, and a lot of triumph as well. After attending the Jim Russell Racing School in England, he progressed through various formulae, Formula Ford, Formula 3, Formula 2, Can-Am, and eventually arrived in IndyCar racing and Formula One in the early 80s. He cemented his place as a racing legend by winning the aforementioned Indianapolis 500, and he later won the 1988 IndyCar Championship. He continues to be involved in racing through the FIA, and he's here today to talk about his life and many experiences. Please welcome to the podcast Daniel John Sullivan III, known to fans around the world as Danny Sullivan. Danny, thanks so much for making the time for us. We really appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to our talk.
Yeah, it's great to see that you're prospering and you're doing well. We understand you're going to the Dutch Grand Prix this week to perform steward duties with the FIA.
That's correct. I've done it. I didn't do any last year because of all the pandemic and mainly because of the quarantine returning. So this is my first one in 2021. And very much looking forward to it. I raced Formula One at Zandvoort. I did one of my very first Formula Ford races there ever. I think my fifth race in my entire history was done at Zandvoort. It's a fabulous track, and they've redone it and got a little bit more banking, I think, in the corner. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I just hope we don't have any controversy with Max, and then we have to make a ruling against it, because this may be the last time you hear from me if that was the case. But now very much looking forward to it.
Yeah. And in addition to that, I mean, you're obviously very active as a businessman. You're the president of SST Aerospace right now, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. How did you get involved in the aerospace business?
Well, it was more of a fluke than anything else. Somebody came to me about helping to manage an airplane. And I said, look, I don't know anything about managing an airplane except writing somebody a check. And we're not going to do that. But I knew somebody. So I put the parties together. And the principal in this group said, you seem like you know a lot of people. So would you like to come to work for us? And so helped raise money and open doors and connections and this, that, and the other. And believe it or not, that's how it all started. And been with them through thick and thin and a couple of different variations of the company. And here we are right now. And so we work with mainly with the U.S. government contractors. So a lot of stuff with different contracts, some directly with the government, and then some with overseas governments as well.
Cool.
But it's much more less glamorous than you think, because it's a lot of behind the scenes stuff and planes being run in different theaters that are not always the nicest, but we still need them there. And these are non-combative airplanes. They're just usually like a communication relay, doing photo work, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes moving people around, but not very often.
Yeah, your versatility as a businessman and as a public figure reminds us that early on you held a wide variety of jobs. A lot has been written about that you were a cab driver in New York City and a lumberjack, a sod cutter, a chicken farm hand, things of that nature. We recently spoke with Paul Page, and he talked about how a lot of his early jobs that he had prior to being a broadcaster, really, he took a lot of important life lessons from those. Were there any important life lessons or truths that you took from these early jobs that you carried with you into your racing and business careers?
I think the biggest thing is that, and again, times have changed. I'm not saying it's always the case, but back then, as if you needed some money and you had to work, you could find a job. They weren't all pleasant. They weren't all fun. They weren't glamorous. There wasn't necessarily a big rainbow at the end of it, but it put food on the table and put the gas in the car and afforded you the opportunity to move on and go try something else if you didn't like it. And, but like everything, you just got to work hard at it and, keep putting your best foot forward, and eventually doors open. And I think that's the biggest thing that I took toward racing. Because look, you're starting off, I didn't have any money to speak of. I had a mentor, but he was, Dr. Faulkner, but he was an academic pediatrician. So it wasn't like he had, just millions of bucks to roll into racing. And so it was kind of one of those things, the harder I worked, the luckier I got. But you had to work hard to create opportunities. And particularly in that era, because we didn't have the internet, we don't have the communications that we have nowadays. So when I was in Europe, basically, you'd every now and again you'd call back or send a fax or communicate that way, but it wasn't really like, oh well, let me just write something online and send it out to a bunch of people back in the States. So the communication was more difficult. It was harder to raise money for an American in Europe at that time, and just everything was a little bit more difficult. By the way, I want to add to that it's still not easy to raise money for racing, but we didn't have the communication highways that we have nowadays.
Yeah, that's a great segue because talking about your entry into racing, your path to professional racing driver took you through the Jim Russell Racing School in England, and we understand this was following the advice of your aforementioned family friend Frank Faulkner.
Well, actually, believe it or not, Frank asked Sir Jackie Stewart, who was, of course, just Jackie then, because he was, Frank was very close with Ken Tyrrell and traveled a lot of races and so forth. And he was talking to him about me, and Sir Jackie said, well, why don't you send the lad over to Jim Russell, and let's see if he has any talent. And so it really, the Jim Russell thing came through Frank, but it was a suggestion by Sir Jackie.
What were some of the things that you learned at the Jim Russell School, like the key things that helped your development as a racing driver in those early days?
Well, I think what it really gave me was the first time I sat down in the car, and you're going to probably drive home or drive to the grocery store faster than they allowed us to drive these little Formula Fords. We didn't build up from a road car or anything. It was just Formula Fords then. But they had a limiter on it, and they charge you if you'd over rev it and went above the stuff, and they had a way to set it back that you couldn't get to reset the tack. But it was just, wow, this is something special. And then they taught us different things about lines and braking, and then about a little bit they put us in some races, just school races against each other. But I think the biggest thing that I learned was, and this was the first step, was about focus and concentration. That because it was, even in those races, you do a 8-lap race, and you'd miss a gear or make a mistake, and it was really that you lost focus or paying attention to that actual gear change. And I think that was the first step. And then I'm going to bring Sir Jackie Stewart back into the deal. I was a gopher for part of that time for the Tyrrell team. So when it was he and Francois Sever. And so just being around them and around the Tyrrell team and the mechanics and Ken and Sir Jackie and Francois, and seeing how professional they were. Because if you really think back about it, Jackie was really the first true sponsor professional. I mean, I think he still was Rolex. I think he might still be with Goodyear. He was with Ford forever. He might even still be with Ford. I mean, in some capacity. And so he developed those relationships, and he was a guy that taught us a lot about looking after the fans and all that kind of stuff. More, not so much that he sat me down and said, hey, here, do this, do this, do this. It was more through osmosis, watching what he was doing. Although he did give me one piece of advice early on. He said, make sure you have a signature that people can read. You know, he said, when they're asking for an autograph, make sure your signatures. I'll never forget that type of thing. And he said, and always treat people nicely, because you just, you never know who they are.
Mhm.
And that's another story further into our conversation. But it was just, it was a big education. And of course, there's another thing too. So many people come to England, especially in those days, and even nowadays, they go there because it's a melting pot of people from Brazil, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Europe, from all the countries in Europe, all over the place. They all come there to race, because, and especially in the junior formulas, because that's where, if you're going to get seen and you really want to develop your talent, that's where you need to do it. And so if you go to the pub, I used to go to a pub when I lived in London. Well, the head of Autosport was there. The head of Motoring News was there. Two of the journalists were there. So you're gleaning information. It's all around you. There's race shops every place, So it's pretty dynamic place from that perspective.
Yeah, so you after you progressed through various formula, you started a handful of IndyCar races in 1982, but you the following year you drove a full season for Tyrrell in Formula One, and obviously you just shared a really impressive tidbit about your involvement with Tyrrell far before that point. Apart from the obvious thing in the early 80s, in 1983, they had just outlawed ground effects in Formula One, and it was still in IndyCar racing. Apart from that obvious difference, what were the biggest technical differences back then between IndyCars and F1?
Well, the single biggest difference when I did Formula One, which was just the '83 season, um, and I'm going to go back on something in a second, but the biggest difference was that it was the beginning of their turbo era.
Mm-hmm.
The turbochargers were, the Renault was turbocharged, the BMW, or well, at the time it was Bernie's team. They had the BMW with PK, but still the not normally aspirated cars left were the McLaren, the Williams, and the Tyrrell. But the writing was on the wall that the turbo era was going to go there. And going back, even though I knew Ken and I did get the invitation, because he, not to come do the runoff, if you like. And there was, I think, 9 or 10 of us that showed up. One of your former guests here on your show was Stefan Johansson. He was in the test. Bebe Gabbiani, Teo Fab, Teo was not there. Bruno Giacomelli, all these guys that were the hot shoes in the time. And Benetton had joined Tyrrell, and Benetton wanted, I got the invite because they were interested in the American market. They were going to go into the American market. But the good news, I had to prove at the test, and I outdrove everybody, had more consistent, faster times than everybody in the group, even though I was the last one out. And then I had to do another test alongside Michele Alboreto, who was the team main driver in Brazil, before Ken actually signed off and said, okay, you selected yourself. So it wasn't a walk in the park to get that. And certainly it helped to have a relationship with him. But in some ways he was more brutal on me than anybody else. And
Mm.
just because we had a past relationship. But but that was a big step. That was something that I wanted to do. Unfortunately, Benetton had to pull out, or did pull out, because Tyrrell did not get a turbocharged engine for the next year, and the writing was on the wall. So they went to Tolman, and they had a lot of you all might not remember, but Brian Hart had built a turbocharged engine. And I tried to get Ken to put some money in so he'd have the turbocharged engine so I could keep my drive. I mean, I sat in the BRDC pavilion with he and Mr. Tolman to try to get the deal done. And Ken was stubborn. He thought that Ford was going to come to his rescue, and unfortunately, that cost him big time on that sponsorship. So, and I don't know if you remember, but Tolman became the Benetton Formula One team that Schumacher
Mm-hmm.
drove for and eventually won 2 world championships. But
That's right.
that's what it morphed into. Question for you and everybody listening: what team did the Tyrrell team morph into and is still in existence today?
Oh goodness, it's so easy to lose track of. I'm not. I want to say that somewhere along the line it was the Renault team, the previous one, but I could be wrong. I don't remember.
Mercedes Benz.
Oh, that's right.
Because remember Jacques Villeneuve and those guys and bought started a team. They
Mm-hmm.
bought the Tyrrell franchise. Then it was taken over by Ross Brawn and became the
Oh, BAR.
became the BAR. So it was BAR and Ross Brawn, the Brawn Formula One team, and then he sold to Mercedes.
Yeah.
But that was the lineage, if you like, of the Tyrrell team.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I mean, you can look at a lot of them, but that one was a pretty special one too, especially for me.
The Benetton one, a lot of people get confused about early on. Like the people look back, they go, if they see a Benetton sponsored Tyrrell, they go, "Oh, that's a Benetton F1 car." No,
Yeah.
it is a Tyrrell.
Yeah, but it was only for the 1 year.
That's
sadly.
true.
Or was it 2 years? But anyway, it was 1 or 2 years, but it wasn't real long, which was really a pity. So certainly from where I'm sitting, but there again, if they had stayed, I might not have come to Indy. And
That's true.
So
Anyway. Something that was occurring to me when I was preparing for this interview, and it's funny, like you watch IndyCar races from the 80s, and if you come up on the screen and it's a oval race, you can just wait for it. Somebody says, Danny's strong suit is generally road courses and not ovals. And I'm like, I look back at your results. You won the Pocono 500 in your first full season of IndyCar racing. So which is an incredibly difficult oval race.
Yeah, I won, and in fact, I won that twice, and I won the Michigan 500. And there's only a handful of us that won all 3 500 milers.
Yeah, no.
Now I wasn't I'm not trying to pretend that I was an oval guy the way Rick Mears was an oval guy. Rick was probably the best there ever was on an oval, certainly in my time. But my background really was much more road racing. But I had a lot of success on the super speedways. So anyway. It's perception. It's perception.
Well, with your background in racing on road courses, were there things that you had to, like muscle memory things and techniques that you had to change in order to succeed on ovals? And I've heard various stories from people about how they had to forget certain things. I mean, certainly Jimmy Johnson right now going from one discipline to another, it's a big shift. But like, there are certain road course racing things that do not work on an oval for certain.
Right.
But
to be fair to Jimmy, I think the biggest transition he has is not so much going to the road courses, but going from a 3,500 pound car
mm-hmm.
to a 1,500 or 1,600 pound car that just does everything different and better in terms of what it'll do on a road course. So, but for mine, can I tell you a quick story? My first oval race was at Atlanta. Okay. And this was in those 3 races I did in 82. And I showed up at Atlanta and I'm lost. I mean, I'm lost. Okay. And we're going out to qualify. And I can't hit my ass with both hands. I mean, I'm that far back. I mean, it just, I'm just lost. Okay. And I'm coming out of a Porto can to go do qualifying. True story. And I run into Big Al. And I knew Big Al from Can-Am days and some stuff like that. So I said, hey, I said, Al, can you help me? I said, I'm lost. I don't know what I'm doing. He said, you're driving it like a road racer. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, you come down to the straightaway and you come to turn 1 and you roll out of the throttle, get the car all set and then pick up the throttle. He said, on an oval race, you got to carry it down into the corner, come off the thing, lift off down more in the middle, roll out of it, and then pick the throttle back up and go. And he says, ask Wally to give you an extra warm-up lap, which you could do. It wasn't just like a favor. You could ask for 3 instead of 2 warm-up laps.
Mhm.
And I went out the first lap, and in those days, the engines revved to, the Cosworth revved to about 10.8. And the first lap I went out, and I think it was like 7,000 RPM. I just carried it down just went 7,000 RPM down straightaway, carried it down into the corner, rolled out, picked the throttle right back up, and went. Next one I did 8,000, and the next one I did 9. Because I just, it's not something oh yeah, I got it, no problem, and just jump on it. And so anyway, I did it, and I ended up qualifying 10th. And for the longest time, I had the highest finish by a rookie in the first race. I finished 3rd in the race.
Wow.
But if it hadn't been for Big Al, trust me, I was lost. And then remember the old Milwaukee? Remember how rough old place that was? I remember the first
very
time.
rough. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember the first time I showed up there, and I asked Gordon, saw Gordon Johncock, and I said, hey, where do you pass around here? I was more trying to figure out where I was going to get past around here. And he said, we pass you from the wall to the grass, and so I remember I came off of turn 1, 2, and I'm going down the back straightaway, and Foyt was right behind me. So I just kind of rolled out of the throttle, and I tried to follow, Foyt won Milwaukee, I don't know how many times. And I tried to follow him around for a couple laps just to see how he was doing it. And I mean, it taught me so much. I can't tell you. And so I think that's the big thing, is getting that oval experience. And remember, back then they're more open diffs now, but back then on the ovals we ran a locker. So the setup, and there was more stagger. You had a bigger right side stagger. Some people ran a different spring set. They're a little bit more balanced now in terms of that. I'm not saying they still don't do some of those things, but they're a little bit more advanced. They were probably a little cruder back then. And so it was just getting used to the different techniques to drive an oval car,
Yeah.
and anyway, I mean, I had some success. I didn't win as many as I would have liked to have won. You never do, but it, we adapted okay.
Well, your early success in '84 was obviously noticed by Roger, because he hired you for the '85 season. You were going into a really well-established team with Rick Mears and other key figures present. What was it like to come into a team like that was surrounded by such a rich mix of experience and talent?
Well, it's pretty overwhelming. But remember, in '84, I won San Air, which was a short oval, Pocono, and Cleveland. So I kind of had won on a different thing. So I had okay confidence in terms of, I could pedal. And in Pocono, when I beat Mears for the win, we were racing off the last corner of the last lap. So it was I had a pretty good confidence that if you had a good car and so forth, but you've got to learn the people, the techniques, the personalities. You got to get comfortable. Derek Walker was on the radio instead of Dennis Swan, who I had on the radio before. And, you got to restart a relationship. And, people, it's funny, just your engineer, for example, if I come in and I say, well, it's got a little bit of push, or it's got a little bit of oversteer, depending on whether I'm a road course or whatever. The engineer has to understand what you mean by a little bit. Okay. Because I mean, everybody's different, and once you develop those relationships and so forth, and let me give you an example. Okay. Remember they canceled Phoenix because they had a problem. Remember, with the track. So the first race was Long Beach.
Right.
Okay. Well, I'm leading coming out of the hairpin on the last lap and ran out of fuel. And there was a pretty famous picture because I got out and tried to push the car down because the straightaway kind of slopes down there, and I thought, well, if I can get it rolling, maybe I can get across the finish line. Well, I ended up finishing 3rd, but Derek Walker said to me, I said, how do we run out of fuel? And he said, we haven't had anybody drive a car in a road race the same way you drove a car. He said, you drove it every lap like it was a qualifying lap. And so my consumption was greater. And I'm not saying that in any kind of braggart way. I don't mean it that way, but it's just those little learning curves for the team, everybody to get to know you, you get to know them. And boy, have times changed. When I signed for Penske, from the end of the last race of the season till the first race in Long Beach, this shows how much we did. 52 test days. I mean, it's unheard of. You just get, you can't test that much most of the time. It's mostly restricted now. But that was Roger. He was trying to get me integrated into the team and vice versa, and I think that, and it was loved racing for Doug Shearson Racing. And Doug was a fabulous, close friend, fabulous guy, the family, everybody was great. Dennis Swan, all the people there. But when you went to Penske, it was just a bigger operation. And that's where I was thinking I was going to have a better chance for Indy and a championship.
Yeah. Well, in only your first season in with Penske, we come to what many people consider the defining moment of your racing career, certainly within the public's memory, the famous spin and win in 1985. Talking about the team aspect, there's one detail from that race that is mentioned every now and then, and that's where you had just received communication from the team that you had 80 laps to go, but for whatever reason, you had heard it as being 12 laps to go. So
I thought it was 20.
20, excuse me.
Yeah, but it was a small number compared to how many laps were left, But the problem there too, remember the radios weren't quite so good. I was behind Mario. The turbulence was bad. I couldn't look up and clearly see the number on the scoring pylon, because everybody said, well, why don't you just look up at the scoring pylon? Well, my head was getting buffed around so much behind Mario, I couldn't read it, and there was already 3 digits up there. So, it could have been, it could have been anything. As far as I know, it could have been 199 laps. I mean, I couldn't read it. And so, but my car was quicker off of 3 and 4 than it was off of 1 and 2. And that's why, because a lot of people say, why turn 1? But I just had a better run on Mario there than I did down the back chute. We were more equal off of 1 and 2 than we were on 3 and 4.
So that was why you chose there to make that move.
Well, and also I thought, man, if there's only 20 laps left, I better get going, because Mario's tough to pass at the best of times. Okay. With 20 laps to go and him eyeballing a second Indy 500 win, he's going to be a bear to pass, and he didn't make it easy at 120 laps. Trust me. But it was just one of those things where I thought, man, I got to go. Let's go, but I did misunderstand about the laps.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that everybody remembers about it, obviously, is that you spun and didn't hit anything and went on to win. But equally as impressive is the fact that Mario faded just a bit to the left and managed to avoid collecting you. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, how much, when you look back at that spectacular interaction, which you could not have happened again, 99 times out of 100 if you tried. It's just one of those things that happens. How much of that was just the accumulated skill that was there on that track in the South Chute in that day, and how much of it was happenstance or just luck? What do you think?
I think luck's a big part of it, but I think where part of the luck came is that we were both part of the way around the corner, and so we were, I don't want to say straight, but we were more straight toward the short chute than if it had happened in the first quarter of the thing. I would have hit the wall, because it would have just taken me up there. But because I was further around, so that was luck number one, if you like, or whatever you want to call it. As I don't think that's skill. I mean, I wasn't trying to spin the damn thing. And I think that probably helped Mario a little bit. And I was really thankful it wasn't Mario. If I was lapping somebody that just didn't have his level of experience, somebody could have just piled right into me, or they could have jumped on the brakes, gone up and hit the wall, bounced, who knows. But, and I think he had enough sense to realize that he had more space down low, particularly with the apron, than to go up there. But he's, obviously Mario's a pretty cool customer, and, he made the right call. Thank goodness for both of us. But,
Yeah.
particularly for me. So there's always, look, I think when you spin, I don't think there's a lot of skill involved there. You turn the car trying to correct it and catch it. That doesn't work. Next thing you do is jump on the brakes and hold on, and just figure, because what are you doing? The only thing that I did was when all of a sudden the smoke cleared, because, when I first spin, the smoke's in I can't see anything. It's in the cockpit. And then I spun all the way around. I'm facing the turn 2 suites, and I could see them. So I took my foot off the brake.
Mm-hmm.
So now, is that skill? Or who knows? But anyway, that's what happened. The funny part is, and I'm going to tell you something that I don't know how many people know, but so when it stalled, I was stalled because I hit the brakes. I didn't bother to take it out of gear. I wasn't trying to keep the engine running. I'm thinking I'm hitting the wall. Okay. Because, like you said, 99 times out of 100, you're going to hit the wall. And so now, remember, it's a 5-speed. There's 3 speed up gears to get out of the pits. Okay. And then there's 2 top gears that were a couple hundred RPMs apart. So if you were out cruising by yourself and you wanted to save some fuel, you'd run a different top gear. But if you were racing somebody, you probably have it where it's 150, 200 RPM less. So you got a little bit more pull off the corner. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did back in the day. This wasn't something that I created. This was just how it happened, or what you did. And we didn't have the paddle shifts or anything like that. So now my engine's dead. Well, how fast am I going? I have no idea. They don't have a speedo on this thing. So what gear do I take? Because those speed up gears. So if I go too low or too tall, I could stall it and spin again.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever look at the tape closely, look at the car right when it goes into turn 2, you'll see the car do a like that. I almost lost it again.
Oh my goodness.
And that's when I jump started the engine. And as we sit here speak right now, I think I took 4th gear, which was a top gear, but I'm not 100% sure which gear I took.
Wow.
Because I just was trying. So, so in that time that I'm just explaining to you, that I had to calculate all that like anybody. I'm not saying I'm better at that than Mario or any of the other racers, but that's what we're calculating all while this is going on in milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which gear? Oh, if that's too, and that's how long it took me just to describe it. But I had to do it in, less than a second, I would imagine. So anyway, it all worked out. And the funny part is remember back then, they didn't have live TV. It was the last non-live broadcast. And so
that's right.
So the guys like Derek Walker that are calling the race, they stood behind the pit box because the people up on top were timing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he's calculating back in the back, and he didn't know this, they didn't have any feed. They didn't have a live feed in the back of the pit box. So he didn't know what had happened. So I just said to him, Derek, the yellow's for me. The yellow's for me. I said, no problem. He said, I said, everything's good. And he said, I just sounded like I was an octave or 2 higher than normal. But he didn't know. In fact, Dan Luganbiel comes running in, the communications director from Penske, and Lugie, and he comes running in and he goes, "You will not believe." Derek's like, quiet. I got to figure out, fuel, what to stop, where it's, he had to start calculating because we're going to change tires, refuel. He had to start figuring out how long that's going to take. Mm-hmm. So it's and the fun part for me is I didn't really have time to dwell on it. You're back in a race. It's like, oh, that was a little close. Let's go. We got,
Mhm.
you don't have time to think about it. I got to come in and make a pit stop, change tires, get out, don't make a mistake, get back in the game. So anyway, all good. So,
Now shifting gears for a moment, because
okay.
other friends of mine are, I represent probably the group that's really into Indy cars in our group, but they also pointed out to me, you got to ask Danny about his sports car experience. And that's something that you have to talk about, as far as like you drove the Porsche 956 and 962, and the opposite number, the Jaguar XJR 9.
Right.
What was it like to drive those two compared to Indy cars?
Well, I didn't drive the 956. I drove the
Oh,
962.
just the
And
962.
and they listen, these things for what they did were phenomenal. I mean, particularly, Ross Braun did the Jag. And when I raced the Jag at Le Mans, there was no chicanes on the Mulsanne straight. So I was the fastest on the straightaway, not because I was any faster. I mean, we had a phenomenal group of drivers, but just I did 250 miles an hour on the Mulsanne.
Good grief.
Yeah, 250. And and it's a French road. I mean, it's gotten safer, but back then it was not a place that the Mulsanne, and then you had a kink and then a brow in the road that went up over the brow and down into a hairpin. And I got to tell you something. I love India. I love everything that what it's done for me and for my career and family and so forth. But Le Mans is a really special place. I wish I had done it more times.
Mm-hmm.
Just with IndyCar and stuff like that and so forth. Just there was never the opportunity to really get the freedom in my schedule to give it what it really took.
Yeah.
But Daytona, driving down there and winning GT1 down there, and then we drove the Dower Porsches at 962s at Le Mans, and I actually went through all the scrutineering, all the testing in the city, name on the car, everything, and then my two teammates had locked the seat so you couldn't move them. There was no way to change it. It was all locked in. And both of them, Yannick Dalmas and Mauro Baldi, well, both of them were short.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't drive the car. I got in the car at the track to make sure the seat was okay. And we had done a lot of testing and so forth, and I couldn't drive it.
Mm-hmm.
So they moved Hurley Haywood over into that car because Hurley's shorter. And I got put in with Stuck and Bootson because they're both tall.
Mm-hmm.
And Hurley said to me, I never forget when they were moving us back and forth, and he goes, one of us is going to be very happy. And they ended up winning, and we ended up finishing third. We had a couple of problems. One of them punctured a tire. We lost 4 laps for that. We lost about 10, 11 laps and ended up on the same lap with the leaders and the number 2 car battling across the Toyota going across the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
With Terry Bootson driving. So anyway, it was, I drove with Nelson Piquet there in the BMW. I drove a Ferrari there, drove a Jag there. It's just, Le Mans is special. If you've never done it, make your buddies take you and go to Le Mans because it's a really special week there.
It's on the list, believe me. Yeah.
And I know everything's restricted now anyway because of COVID and so forth, but it's just it's a bucket list item.
Apart from that, also in your career, I mean, 1988 was the year where everything came together for you, and you won the championship with Roger Penske. I mean, there's so many things that have to go right in a season like that. Obviously, the talent of the driver, but also the reliability of the car, the performance of the car, and then you also have the component of the luck of what happens to other people that you're competing against. But but looking back at that 88 championship, other than your driving skill, which frankly was at its zenith, at the time, what other key component was the most critical to securing that championship?
I think that the team effort, because remember, after we had problems at the beginning of the season, I was leading at Indy, had a wing mount fail, hit the wall, and when we got to Portland, we only had like a couple of points. I mean, nothing. We were we were way behind. And, typical of the Penske organization and the people that work there, nobody gave up. And all of a sudden we started winning some races and ticking some stuff off and getting good, strong results, even when we didn't win, and knocked out a whole bunch of pole positions. And I think it was just that, hey, we may be down, but we're not out. And that, never say die attitude. And like you said, now you get a little luck. Somebody else gets a little bad luck. Next thing you know, you jump up some more in the points, and it all kind of came together. That was also that 88 car. PC17 was a fabulous car. It was a fabulous car. Nigel Bennett designed that car, and it just, you know what? It was one of those cars that almost every track, when you rolled it off the trailer, it was strong. It was strong. It didn't require a lot of fiddling and trying to get the balance right or everything. It was pretty good almost everywhere. Then you could, it accepted the changes. A lot of cars don't accept changes very easily, and they fight it, and it's hard to get that balance. Sometimes they're too much on a knife's edge. This car had a really broad band in terms of balance. And I think all of those things to go together, but nobody gave up. That was the most important.
Well, before we wrap up, one small little tidbit. It's hard to squeeze it in because it's not necessarily about racing per se, but you were involved in a video game actually around the latter part of your IndyCar career, Danny Sullivan's Indy Heat, which there's a huge debate always when these come out about how much a driver is actually involved with the making of the game. What can you recall about making that Nintendo game?
Well, I like you said, I wasn't that involved, just on some input about, no, that's not real. That's not that realistic to do that. But remember, these guys are trying to make a video game. And of course, look how they progressed since then. And that was, I think, an 8-bit or it might have even been a 16-bit. Now these things are so advanced now, they're so realistic that everybody uses them. I mean, I remember Jeff Gordon when he did that test at Indy where he and Montoya swapped the Formula One car, the Williams, to his Cup car. He only drove that car. He only drove that Indy car. I mean, that Formula One car 9 laps total. He learned it all in the video game, all in the video game, breaking points, everything. And now in Formula One, my gosh, the what do you call them? The simulator guys are phenomenal. And, you got to be they've just progressed so much, but the reality is I didn't have a lot to input on it other than a few things. And I'm not the best video gamer. but the kids nowadays, it's just, and they're a necessity nowadays. You can, if you're getting ready you get hired to go drive a race, you don't have time to go do one of those 52 test dates like I did with Penske. You can get on the game and get on one of those games and pick up the track that you're going to and start learning. You can even race people again, on them. So phenomenal. It's the future.
Well, Danny, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It's great to listen to you reminisce about these things, and it's great to see how plugged in you are into what's going on now. And you obviously have a lot of great expertise to offer on this subject. But anyway, thank you very much, and safe travels to Holland. We hope everything goes well for you over there.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time on the show. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, for Danny Sullivan, this is Jason White saying so long, and we'll see you on our next podcast. Everyone, take care and be safe.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Danny.